The double shot is back. I am John Pollock alongside Wai Ting. We're talking today about Jeff Jarrett and the battle for TNA. And this starts off our weekly reviews. We're opening up the double shot for the whole summer. We are going to be going weekly with, what is it? It's 7 topics over 9 episodes, I believe, of Dark Side. And we're going to be mixing these in with WWE Unreal, which starts toward the end of the month. And we'll be doubling up. It'll be a real double shot because we'll be doing Dark Side and WWE Unreal. We're just going to be watching docs nonstop.
Which is what we do here. Watch and talk about it and join us for the ride.
So, Wai, this was our first, the 2-parter of a 3-part series. We almost got our own season dedicated to TNA, the 6 sides of TNA, which was a great title that they had in the works. I do not doubt that they could have got.
And I do want to maybe even before people listen to this, maybe if you want to maybe even get prepped for this, listen to John's interview with Evan Husney, as has been sort of annual tradition now. You kind of do one with Evan, right? Before every single season.
I said this in the interview. Listen, at this point of my life of chasing down interviews, I'm full on Danny Glover in Lethal Weapon at this point when it comes to chasing down interviews. Because, as you know, sometimes it's really hard to chase people down to get them to show up. Evan usually, whenever these Dark Side seasons begin, you see him do the rounds. He's everywhere. He is very proactive. He reaches out. He's always cool to deal with. And I was he's just a real easy person to sit down and chat with. It's never hey, I've got this amount of time. It's just go. And he really just does the whole media gamut when Dark Side comes out. And that's a big part of this. When you're putting out a book or a doc series, I almost look at it the hardest stuff is producing the actual work, but it's a huge component is then getting out and promoting it. That's as important as getting the word out. And obviously a lot of this is focused on TNA, which it's a subject matter that people are engaged in. And could they have done a whole season on TNA? They certainly could have done. There's no shortage of content when it comes to TNA that you can mine for stories and discussions and talking points. But this one, they ended up that Vice wanted this for the Dark Side franchise, and they agreed on 3 episodes to start the season.
Just listening to Evan talk about that decision to maybe not move ahead with a 6-part TNA story and instead framing it into what was initially a 2-part TNA story, then extended to 3 just because they, I guess, had that much more to fit in. It sounds more like a branding issue. Maybe there's some concern that, hey, would this be as strong without the Dark Side moniker attached to it versus just fitting it in within the season itself?
I think that was probably their thinking when it came to who killed WCW was, I think it's the branding of Dark Side gives it this halo effect. And that's the franchise that they're promoting. And I'm sure that was the thinking. And the fact that, if they were that satisfied, I guess, with doing the Outside series, this would have been a natural follow-up to Who Killed WCW. And maybe they just see these stories are. I remember Vice a few years ago, they did a non-Dark Side documentary on China. And that was another one. It just didn't gain the same acclaim. It was a separate doc. And I think they realized Dark Side is the franchise. And that's where we want all the wrestling stories to be told under that umbrella.
Yeah, it tells you, really the strength of, I guess, the title at this point and the great reputation that I think it's built for itself. To this day, 7 seasons in, it still at least manages to, I think, make some pretty strong headlines for its subject matter, especially if new information happens to be revealed. To me, it's especially now having seen so much of WWE's recent documentary productions, this is still to me the standard for investigative documentary in our space.
What do you think about the title? And not so much just from the consumer standpoint, but it seems that is still a obstacle at times for the series I think it's a good name because I think it does capture people's attention. It's it's been enough that people associate a certain quality now with Dark Side of the Ring. But when you're telling a lot of these personal stories, emotional stories, I think it is still like they do have to kind of convince some of the subjects on like Dark Side of the Ring. Like we're not trying to do like a tabloid type of exploitation of sensitive stories like this. And I think generally, now that there are so many seasons in, I think the turning point was the handling of the Owen Hart story, of the Chris Benoit story. Like they did those with a certain amount of care that, well, it's just like, what do you think of it in terms of the title, and that if it presents like an obstacle for them at this point, or if people generally understand like this is more than just trying to do like the seedy underbelly of pro wrestling, and that's where people naturally associate it with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a a gift and a curse, right? Like having the title certainly like it evokes, I think, a bit more curiosity than just to say what like stories of the ring, or something a bit more neutral. I think like just suggesting that, hey, you're about to like I don't know, see something that's maybe has been protected from coverage like in the past, like there's something you're not supposed to see, like that to me is certainly a bit more attention grabbing, which is strong, but like almost
Stories of the Ring.
Yeah, like that sucks, right?
Wrestling with blank, that is the ultimate go-to.
I think at this point they certainly aren't able to change it. Now is it so I think they gain more benefit from, having it versus not having it, certainly by this point. At the same time, like almost every single one of these episodes shines light on a dark subject matter to take us to, most of the time, like I think what feels more of a happy ending for all of them. So in all of those cases, even if like there are sort of dark moments in the stories, they tend to end, at least most of them, on a positive note.
So going into this series, I mean, definitely a subject that has come up everywhere was, the obvious lack of participation by Dixie Carter. I'll say certainly everyone, I think, would have thought this would have been, better served with Dixie Carter involved. I would also argue the other omission that stood out to me was Mike Tenay. I think Mike Tenay would have been a great addition as well to this. That said, they got just about everyone else in positions that you would want to hear from talent to executives. Like we had Scott D'Amore, Jim Cornette, Vince Russo, Eric Bischoff, Tony Khan will pop up in the third episode. The Hardys were in this. I mean, they did check off the boxes of a lot of different perspectives. I would say, obviously, he's had a lot of health issues. Dutch Mantell, maybe you could say, sure, in there. Yep. But I would imagine Cornette and Dutch Mantell would kind of parallel each other to a certain degree. This was maybe the only time I have had like the Cornette Russo stuff, and I found it was like, I do feel Russo was needed for these episodes. And I am not always high on Vince Russo's involvement in these shows, but I did think he added a lot here to play like the very different factions that were represented within TNA, and he represented one of those factions. And in some ways, he was the closest to maybe Dixie Carter's representation, because this guy was, I would say, at times aligned with Jarrett, but more times aligned with Dixie throughout his tenure. And Dixie was always very loyal to Russo, to their detriment. I thought Dixie stayed loyal to Russo all those years of keeping him. So I think there is some of that deference too, that you're getting at least maybe a partial representation of Dixie's point of view through Russo here. But Dixie obviously was the glaring one.
You can't tell the story of WCW without Vince Russo, and I don't think you can tell the story of TNA without Vince Russo. He's a major part of all of it, and so I thought he was very necessary. I think having Jim Cornette here, not just as maybe somebody involved with TNA, but also as a historian, I thought was very useful, especially for this episode, talking about Jeff Jarrett, some of his earlier years. I'll also say, obviously these people are not taking part in Dark Side of the Ring, but like people currently employed by the WWE, like Jeremy Borash, I think would have been.
Yeah, Borash jumps out too.
especially on the production
Kurt
side
was
of
not
things.
interviewed for this, which
Yep.
like Kurt really doesn't have a solid affiliation with WWE. I don't know what would prevent Kurt from having been involved here.
Yeah,
Certainly
AJ to some extent, just given the fact that he, I think, could have spoken, like, he was probably the most famous guy not in the main event scene, right? I think he would have spoken a lot too, especially the early days of the company. But like they seem to give you, I think, a very full look without at least a Dixie Carter. Well, Dixie was not really a relevant part of this particular episode. But otherwise, I thought you had a pretty full look at, maybe the characters involved.
Yeah, we could have had Richard Scrushy of Hell South. He could have been interviewed.
Yeah, I don't know if he's doing many interviews these days.
Yeah, I don't know if what his rate is for shoot interviews. So, I mean, sometimes this is a negative where you have to speed through so much. But the key here is that this is called Jeff Jarrett and the Battle for TNA. It's not the definitive story of Jeff Jarrett. And therefore, I appreciated the fact that, yes, you want to contextualize Jeff's position in pro wrestling, but they literally had to go through like 20 years of wrestling before TNA in about 10 minutes at the beginning here. And I did not think that was like, I think everyone wanted to get to the TNA part. So
yeah.
I didn't
need to hear about Double J. I didn't need to hear about like really much. I mean, they spent more time certainly on Owen. But that was, I think, about as much, as I think you needed for something like this.
It also strikes you of how Jeff is involved in all these significant moments in wrestling history, most of which have had their own dark side episodes, from Owen's passing, the end of WCW. They show the Bash at the Beach at 2000 that he's right in the midst of as well. Like all these different significant events in the last 30 years, Jeff finds himself in the circumference of a lot of them. And it also details the fact his parents divorcing at the age of 3. And what I didn't really know all that well until Jeff has been doing all these interviews was, we know the problems he had with his father. They did reconcile before Jerry's passing, but also the fact that he was estranged from his mother as well and continues to be. And I mean, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but the story about when Jill passes in 2007 and neither of his parents attend the funeral. And I find that was just heartbreaking. I'd never heard that story before. And I just, I don't know how you wrap your head around something like that. If I don't care what your relationship is, to miss the funeral of your child's spouse. It does kind of give you the sense here of Jeff that, by his own admission, like he presented himself publicly and he internalized a lot. And there is a lot of messy stuff in his upbringing with his parents, divorcing at a young age, and extended into his adulthood with very complicated relationships with both parents.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever had this sort of like look at Jeff Jarrett, right? Like, I don't think there's been a WWE produced documentary, unless I'm mistaken.
No, not.
They didn't.
I mean, I'm sure they did some stuff around the Hall of Fame, but nothing extensive to this degree. No.
Yeah, nothing that would give you a glimpse into Jeff Jarrett, and like I would say the many traumas of his life. Like I for the most
the Owen stuff he's definitely gone into with the Conrad show and stuff, but.
Right.
To put all of this out there, I was learning about several of these things for the first time.
For most of my wrestling fandom, it feels like Jeff Jarrett has been more of a, polarizing figure, if not like, outright, I think, more heavily criticized figure, just by the fact that like he was probably given professional wrestling pushes that weren't as deserved as maybe they would have been for others. I think like I've only heard maybe more criticism than praise for Jeff Jarrett, but this piece really gives you a glimpse into, I think, like the person, and certainly makes him feel a lot more sympathetic throughout the course of these 2 episodes.
Yeah. again, we're not going to go too much into detail, but, you know, of course, he famously has to go out right after Owen's passing. He's in the very next match, and I think anyone that watched that pay-per-view that night, there are a few things you will remember from that show. Of course, Jim Ross's announcement of Owen's death, but the other being that there is a absolutely traumatized Jeff Jarrett that has to do a promo right after they cut to the back. He's with Deborah. He's in tears. Deborah's in tears. And these two have to go out. And I don't know if it's the same for you. Wait, like, I watched this pay-per-view. I've never gone back to watch this. I knew they were in the very next match. You could not have, I could never have guessed who their opponents even were. And it's Val Venus and Nicole Bass in the ring. Like, I would have had no idea who their opponents even were in this match. That's how much of a blur a lot of this show is. And then he's right back to work the next night. They do the tribute show. He gives a really heartfelt speech about Owen. And he did a very long interview with Ariel Helwani this week and talked about the fact, like, yeah, I wasn't given the option of taking time off, but I never would have done that. I never would have taken time off. And this sort of, it sets the table for a lot of grief that he internalizes that would manifest in years to come, and not properly dealing with this very traumatic event. It's not just the loss of a friend. It's the loss of a friend in the most frightening of ways, in such a like reckless event that occurred. It's being broadcast, and you are sent out to the scene of where this occurred moments after the fact to perform. Like, that is a level of compartmentalizing, and that I don't know how you come out of this and just figure, you know, you just move on from this.
I was in the ring and walked through the crater that his body left, is what he says in this episode. And I think it's one of the worst things that's ever happened in wrestling. The fact that, the death happened at all, and then that wrestlers were tasked to perform in what I don't think was like readily apparent, you know, back then in the moment, was how close Jarrett and Owen were. I mean, hearing Jarrett talk about him now, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, you know, like they bonded through, I think, similar upbringings, both being the sons of promoters, both being in similar places in their lives as family men. And when he describes him as his best friend, I completely believe it. So he just witnessed the death of his best friend moments ago, and has to perform in the same place where he died. I can't imagine how awful that would be, and I think it's almost just unforgivable. Like, the more you learn about that story, how they decided to keep the show going.
The exit from WWE is covered, and he's gone into this a lot over time in terms of the circumstances of negotiating with Jim Ross. His contract is up before the No Mercy event, which is in October, and he's still got the Intercontinental title. He needs to lose it to China, but his thinking was, listen, there are, you know, the pay-per-view payoffs come within 90 days, and if I drop the title here, I give up any leverage I might have to be paid on, like, future payments that I'm owed. And he ends up working out a figure. And then from his vantage point, he brings up to Jim Ross about how, you know, they told him that with his wife, who was already dealing with breast cancer, they took him off the road by Linda McMahon's orders that he be at home. And because he wasn't on the road, didn't meet his downside. And therefore, Jeff says that you guys reneged on my deal. I'm reneging on this new deal, and I want even more money to go out there and lose. And so it's like his argument is like, I never held them up for money, but in some ways, it's like you kind of did as well at the same time.
His explanation there sounds like he was holding them up because they screwed with him first.
In his eye, he was like this. It's not like this. It was like he was making himself whole. He was like, money that you prevented me from making, I'm now making up at the end here when I've got the leverage. And he did have leverage.
So that is all stories discussed on his podcast. that was not what was conveyed in this episode, which is a much more simplified version of events, and one that I would suggest I think was almost too simple, because I came out of this scene not having heard the podcast story, not having heard his prior explanations, and I didn't really get a great sense of what exactly took place here. The way he describes it is, he didn't get into anything about like them screwing him with his contract, or like, you know, like being told to stay home so that he didn't meet his downside. Didn't say anything like that. He just said something about like, I don't know, like having leverage at this point, and then chose to go to Vince to ask for the figures come from Cornette, so I don't know if they've been confirmed from Jarrett, but Cornette says Jarrett asked for $100,000, circled around the building. Vince agreed, circled around the building, and then said, "What do I have to lose?" Went back and asked for 200,000.
Yeah.
That was the extent. Now, are those numbers like, has Jarrett confirmed those numbers?
He probably has on his podcast. He's definitely gone into this on his podcast, and he did in the Helwani interview as well. But like when he's describing it, this is like a 10, 15-minute story that they're just not going to dedicate that amount of time to more so. But I would encourage you, if you want to hear more about it, like Jarrett certainly feels he was justified. I think he's a little, like, he believes that he was totally cool with Vince, that Vince was totally fine with all of this, and that none of this played a factor in him not getting any outreach from WWE when they went out of business. I think that's going a little too far here.
He maintains that to this day, that this incident with China had nothing to do with him never being brought back to the WWE. Until as a producer, or until the Hall of Fame.
He thought that this was just that Vince was cool with him on the way out here, and yeah, he does not believe that this was like this.
Okay, so that is in line with how Dark Side of the Ring, how this interview presents the situation. Like Jarrett and Cornette describe, I would say, what is to anybody else, especially to Vince McMahon, you would read as a pretty tense situation of a talent holding Vince McMahon up for more money in exchange for dropping a championship. Yet Jarrett says, yeah, by the end, Vince shook my hand, said it was a pleasure doing business with you, and then gave me a check and went my way. Like, happy ending.
He was asked again, that the Helwani interview is very good, by the way. It's like an hour and a half. It's a great add-on to all of this. It contextualizes a bunch. When he was asked about how Vince basically singled him out on that final Nitro and essentially fired him on the air, Jarrett's response was, I thought that was just the Mr. McMahon character that was doing what the Mr. McMahon character would have done. It was like, well, the real Vince McMahon never offered you a job. They never even reached out to you at that time. So I think you have to do a little deducing on your part. Whether Jeff is saying that for whatever reason. I mean,
you had Karen say, sorry, I'm mixing that up. I'm mixing Karen up with Angle, but like he had no other options, right, to go to work. He didn't have the WWE option. Like, do we even know if he was asked to, like, if
he says they never reached out to him, and he never reached out to them after WCW. There was no outreach from either side, which I think is pretty telling when you look at how many WCW talent, like everybody ended up there at some point in time. And it's not like TNA starts a few months after. It's a full like 15 months after WCW goes out of business that TNA starts. Like, he gets involved with the WWA company in Australia, but it's all setting the seeds for TNA, which, folks, we needed to do something different. And it's time to launch the company whose name has endured it all.
I wanted something in the branding of the name to make a difference.
Something showbiz.
Something wrestling.
Something to jumpstart what's going on.
Something with alliance or association.
Something that was an alternative. Something to differentiate yourself from the competition.
Something that's crazy.
Let me make this clear to everybody watching at home. It came from me. Tits and ass.
Okay.
It came from me, tits and ass.
Yeah.
He's so proud of this. I came up with it. Yeah, it was supposed to be, get it? TNA, tits, ass.
To this day, I think it's an awful name. I think we've just gotten so used to it that it's just like, it can't be anything else. You know, it's I guess better than Impact. But I think it's stupid, and having Russo essentially confirm like the genesis of it being a really stupid idea, well, just to me seems to confirm that.
And bro, we are going to call the men's division. It is going to be not the heavyweight division. It's going to be balls and strikes.
Sure. Well, he had the Johnsons, of course.
That's right. They did have the Johnsons right out of the gate. So all genitalia was going to be represented in TNA. So we get into the much sordid history that is TNA, and Jeff and Jerry Jarrett pretty much putting up the money, and they open up, they go into business. It's Jeff that does have the controlling shares in this company, but they obviously do need some financing. And that's when we get into the inclusion of Health South, which ends up, and Jeff has gone through this on his own show. So I do have some additional notes here that might give us some better insight here. The original split was 65-35 for Jeff over Jerry. And later that would be diluted. But they get involved. It's actually Mark Miller of the Sawyer Brown group, if you remember, actually played a concert on a WWF pay-per-view that get them in touch with Health South. And Health South is willing to put up like $600,000 for the company and willing to put in more. And it's considered like this big get for them. Unfortunately, Health South, they get 10% of the company, and then they end up facing basically federal sanctions here for all these kinds of problems that Health South undergoes, and they have to pull the plug on their financing of TNA. And this is where they hit their first, like, this is only a few weeks into the operations of the company. Mm-hmm. And again, it's like the luck here is that they had hired Dixie Carter and her Trifecta Entertainment PR firm, and she wants this company to continue and brings up the fact that, hey, maybe you can pitch this to my father. My father is Bob Carter of Panda Energy. And thus they end up getting a big stake in the company. But Jeff still remains the largest individual shareholder in the company. But it's Panda that allows this company to go beyond the summer of 2002, where by all rights, this company would have been dead by the end of that first summer, and Panda gets involved and gives it a second life. And that is really Dixie Carter's elevation, going from just a company partner to, a position of power within the company.
So you can really follow the eras within TNA of, according to like who the financiers were. Maybe the genesis of it was through the Jarretts, but then Health South really being like the first, real major corporate backer. And then they go by relatively quickly. And then we have our Panda Energy saga, I guess you could say, throughout the course of these several, this and the next episode. So I think this episode does a pretty good job of making all of that very digestible and very easily understandable. And I think when you really just even follow the Health South, portion itself, there's just to maybe fit to like the Dark Side moniker. There's even enough of that when you really trace all the ownerships of this company. It's I think there seems to be a really colorful cast of characters just even there. Starting here with what's his name, Richard Scrucci. Scrucci through Dixie
If ever
Carter.
You were to come up with the name of somebody that was accused of falsifying their books, I mean, Richard Scrucci sounds like a fictionalized character.
Yeah, all the way through Billy Corgan. And I would certainly add maybe Len Asper into that mix as well. At
Canada's version of Billy Corgan.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So that's again, all very easily digestible, and I would say very well weaved into the personal story of Jeff Jarrett that this episode has to cover as well.
Yeah, I can imagine like hardcore fans would, the early years are just like, there's so much that you can dive into at this point. They do need to try and tell this story in like 3 hours, and you can't spend the whole time in 2002. But just to give you a sense of the landscape, Panda gets majority control in October of 2002. Jeff comes out of this acquisition majority control by Panda with 29% of the company. Jerry is somewhere in the teens in terms of percentages. And apparently Health South did hold on to like 4 to 5% of the company for years. There was like some attorney that was retaining this percentage. So Health South was like a very small minority owner, but Jeff becomes COO and he would run the wrestling side. Panda would be sort of the business, financing, accounting side. And that's kind of the structure that we're talking about here. But of course, at odds become when, Vince Russo was believed to be involved. Like he says right here, he came up with the name. You have to remember at this time that Hogan lawsuit is still going on, and he is actually not allowed to be going. He has that 1 day run with WWE in June of 2002, right after TNA starts. Probably not a coincidence. But, Russo is always in the periphery here, whether in an official or unofficial capacity. And he goes through many different stages of TNA, but is kind of a constant presence right up to and including the Hogan and Bischoff period as well, and has highs and lows with Jeff Jarrett along the way.
Well, what did the public know of his involvement throughout those particular years?
I mean, 2002 at the start, it's very much believed he's having input, but it's not official. And then I think it's not until 2000 it's not into several months in that he's like fully in, and he's on screen himself as the authority figure and playing Vince Russo. Like that famous Roddy Piper scene where they bring up Owen's death, that's in 2002. And then he does the Sports Entertainment Extreme gimmick in 2003. And at that point, he's all in until they start the negotiations with Hogan in 2003. And that's when him and Jeff have their first big blow up. But, and at the core of this is Jerry on one side, Russo on the other, and Jeff has final say, and he's got to be going back and forth between these two and is trying to play to both sides.
Hearing hearing them describe the tensions between Jerry and Vince, and Jeff suggesting that was part of like the harmony, the yin and the yang is how he describes it.
Yin.
Jerry wanted more wrestling, wanted more like, I guess, like, I don't know, old school, like professional wrestling. And Russo wanted what Russo wanted. And somehow Jeff Jarrett thought,
this ain't 1970s USWA hillbilly, no teeth, pitchfork wielding hillbilly wrestling federation. We want hits.
At this point, like, I don't know, in 2026, seeing like, I think the proof of concept that AEW represents and how the audience's appetite, I feel always was for more professional wrestling and less, I don't know, like teenage like sex and shit humor, midgets jerking off in trash cans. I don't know how
you have not seen it yet. They are the Johnsons.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it, we are going to put them in phallic outfits like penises.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Don't you get it?
Like Russo, I think rightly gets a lot of criticism, but I certainly think Jeff deserves a lot of criticism for thinking that this was somehow a harmonious working booking committee. That when you have two completely opposing sides trying to fit those pieces together.
I think Jeff is way too passive in some of these. Like, you are the final editor here, and this is becoming just detrimental because you are they literally stated at one point, it's it's black and white, and the worst thing you can have is gray. And there's a lot of gray here because you're trying to go both ways here. In some ways, we're bringing in Ricky Steamboat for the prestige and building everything around the NWA title as the belt everyone's chasing. At the other end, we're doing the little people jacking off and all these we're just throwing all this shit at the wall. And if anything, I don't think they emphasized enough of how disjointed of a product this was. And
they seem to like, I forget who it was. It might have been Russo himself, but like they were kind of like suggesting this is the product where anything goes. You never know what's going to happen, as if it was some sort of like positive trait attached to it.
Bro, you could get Harley Race one week with Bullet Bob, and the next week we're going to have a cage dancer taking off her top. Maybe they could have compromised. Let's put Harley Race into the cage and dance. Dancing Harley Race.
If he stuck around long enough, you might have had that.
Yeah, it just paints a totally insane picture here. It was amazing these two lasted as long as they did. And, ultimately, it is like Jeff that more so sides with Russo, which is, it's kind of astounding. I never felt Jeff was one that, he lived through WCW, but I don't think he fully grasped a lot of the failures of WCW. I think he looked at it of just very black and white, that, hey, we were still doing good numbers by television standards at the time. Everyone here, they're big stars. We'll just take them as is, and we'll take Scott Hall and insert him into TNA. Jeff did have a lot of positive visions for TNA, like the X division is focused upon here. Eventually the Knockouts division, you can paint a picture of a very positive one of early TNA and focus on just those things. You can also paint a horrible picture of the other stuff that they were doing, but it was all of it combined and together with this model of weekly pay-per-views that was doomed from the get-go. And they got inflated numbers that did not turn out to be the case. That was a whole issue that wasn't really brought up here. So they had an inflated sense of how well this was performing, and then they got the dash of cold water over the head and realized, oh shit, we're doing a lot less than we were doing and not breaking even. So, they come out of it, and they got this gift in the form of Dixie Carter that just happened to be the PR firm that they had chosen to go with, which very well easily could have been something that, they go with another PR firm and she's not the one that they pick, and TNA dies.
Somehow the allure of running a professional wrestling company,
there's no other company that's benefited from that than TNA.
Yeah. Of course you can understand maybe the appeal of doing that, but enough to invest. These are people with a lot of money, of course, and maybe, at this point,
how much Panda, how much Anthem, the money that has gone
Billy
into
Corgan,
this company.
I would
Corgan,
say as well.
Dude, we can go through all of them. That's the round table I want, is everyone that has owned a stake in TNA over the years, and the millions that went into this company that were never turned into profits along the way, save for this period that Jeff has outlined, that from 2007 to 9, that's when the company made money. Essentially, when they got that 2-hour slot on Thursday nights, from that period, they were actually making money. And it's right before the Hogan Bischoff period that it is profitable. But besides that, this has been a money-losing entity for a huge portion of its history.
Well, I hope a lot of people had fun, though.
I'm sure they had a lot of fun. That is a guarantee.
And a lot of people got paid. A lot of wrestlers were able to make a living. A lot of TV crew were able to make a living. Absolutely.
So they don't have time to go into the Fox Sportsnet era, or where they're off Fox Sportsnet. If you remember, there was a time they were literally just posting the show online during that 2005 period, when they were actually doing, I think, some of their best pay-per-views. That's when Scott D'Amore had a big input, and they were just really leaning on the X division, and there were some very good shows. And then they get on Spike TV in October 2005, and that's what we fast forward to. It's after WWE has just gone back to the USA Network, and they're going to air late on Saturdays in an 11 p.m. Eastern 1 hour time slot. And this is where they get into some of the fan criticism of Jeff Jarrett being the top star. Scott D'Amore is on this. I thought Scott D'Amore was very good on these episodes, mainly because I think and a lot of these people, it's not as though speaking about TNA is going to cost them a job in 2025 or 26. Scott D'Amore seems like he's in a, like, I don't give a fuck stage. Like, he's just going to tell it as it is. And he even agrees, like, Jarrett was on top for a long time, and there were problems with that. The counter was that Jarrett on top was the one guy that was not going to take an offer from Vince or leave the company or hold them up. But he at that period, like, that was a big turnoff for people at the time. And Jeff basically said,
do you buy that? That?
I think it's a convenient reason to put it in there.
Were there no other options that they could have committed to a contract to put the championship on other than?
I mean, ultimately they did, right? When they get Kurt Angle, it's basically, and that is when Jeff does take quite a step aside. Like, once Angle is in there, he really does become the guy. But it was just, it was heavily reliant on Jeff. And I would say, like, the one argument I would have about this is a very positive reflection overall of TNA, especially in these years, that it's like we're going up and up and up, and we go to Spike and it's up and up and up. And it's like, you do have to be honest here that while they were able to attract a television audience, this was a company that was never able to convert its fans into paying in mass amounts, whether it be for tickets to live events, whether it was pay-per-views. Like, that was the big problem. Why were you attracting 1,000,001 every single week, and yet you were struggling to hit 30,000 buys on pay-per-view every month? Like, there's a disconnect there in a huge degree, and that's never really talked about. That ultimately this was a product that fans were willing to watch the TV each week, but they were not willing to spend in mass on this product. And I think you have to be honest about the fact that, like, TNA was not nipping at the heels of WWE. There was a gulf between these companies. Even as WWE was, there was this big opening to attract an audience that was not being serviced by WWE, and a whole talent pool that you had exclusivity on in the X Division guys, in all of these ex-ROH stars. And this is years before NXT took all these same guys and they made a much bigger dent with these same performers that TNA had years of headway to be able to build its whole company around, but got into this cycle of just, we need to grab the next WWE star, and we're just going to filter in more and more of these big stars and just add names. But it watered down sort of the core vision that we were trying to break through with.
Perhaps it's maybe the lack of, I would say, like, higher success that made them not so confident that, fostering an X Division or a Knockouts or things that made them, I would say, like, appeal to more of a niche audience. Maybe that's why they're constantly after your bigger names, thinking that that's what's going to take them over the top. Certainly that was the justification for bringing Hogan in. They were successful enough to a point, but not successful enough to really be a viable, like, closer number two, I guess you could say, because they were number two, but by a wide margin. So, there was always this sort of, like, at least in this era, maybe this feeling of, like, inadequacy that they thought they probably could have fixed with that big WWE name. And in the case of Angle, I think that was the right direction, because I think he blended really well with what made TNA appealing at the time, which was your X Division style, right? Hogan,
his signing,
Nash, not so much.
Like, the only criticism you could levy towards the signing of Kurt Angle was just the man's just state at that time in 2006. There was a lot of concerns about, like, why is WWE cutting ties with this guy? Like, it had to be pretty dire. But in terms of a pickup, that was as big of a signing for TNA as it
he
had.
brought name value as an ex-main eventer, WrestleMania headliner, whatever you want to call him. And also, he was respected and wrestled the style that I think TNA was actually breaking a lot of ground for.
The ending of the first episode, it kind of just outlines the whole disintegration of Jerry and Jeff's relationship. And if you remember this, I remember this very clearly, of one day just going on to WWE.com, and there's Jerry Jarrett's mug on the front page with the future Vladimir Kozlov, Oleg Prudius, who Jerry has brought to headquarters, and they couldn't wait to get. This was when WWE.com was really leaning into this stuff. If you remember that same summer, they put up a photo of Vince and Brett together in the studio when Brett comes in to do the DVD. And, you know, it's when WWE is kind of leaning into more of like actual news stuff. And of course, TNA personnel and wrestlers are looking up. They're like, what the hell's going on? Jerry is a minority owner in this company. What does this mean? Is he trying to offload TNA? Like, what's going on here? And this was really publicly embarrassing for Jeff. And this is the end of their relationship for years.
But,
they don't.
By the
talk
way, is
after
this how Kozlov got into the WWE? Like,
this was the introduction. I had never heard of this guy before this particular time, but yeah, this is like his introduction to WWE, and then he eventually becomes Kozlov within a couple of years.
What do you think this meeting went like? Like, what do you think Jerry Jarrett was suggesting? And now, like, all throughout the episode, everybody, including Jeff, is suggesting this is just Jerry's way of getting out of the TNA. You know, he was trying to cause some controversy by appearing in the other company and wanting to get fired, essentially. How do you think this meeting would have went with Jerry, and whether it be Vince or whoever, to suggest if this is in fact a plan? Whatever happened here.
I mean, Jeff says in this that, you know, his dad, he knew what he was doing. I think from WWE's side, I think that they thought this is a great way to just fuck with TNA. And sure, whatever this guy wants to do, this guy's an owner of like this company it's not really competition, but WWE views all of these companies in a competitive way, that whatever Jerry's motivation is, we're more than happy to listen to this guy come out. And Jerry was more than happy to play his role in fucking with his own son and the company. Like, you don't wake up in the morning and put this outfit on without awful intentions. Like, look at this red and white combo he's got on here. I mean, this is a man that was ready to stir some shit on this morning in July of 2005. You know, certainly, you know, he's passed. You would, you know, Jerry might have provided some. I don't know what your context is that puts this in any kind of favorable light. Like, at the core here, I will say this: Jeff and Jerry, they certainly did not let their blood get in the way of becoming like business adversaries. Like, these, like, Jeff does not sugarcoat feelings towards Jerry. He is, I think, very hard on his father, and I think that was reciprocated. I think Jerry was really tough on Jeff, and you've heard those stories over the years. Like, it's not a smooth relationship that these two have, and I think it's just really sad that at the end of this you had, you know, a period where they didn't even talk to one another, and, you know, you have the funeral, which Jill dies 2 years after this Oleg Prudius PR stunt occurs as well. So, but that's pretty much the end of Jerry in association with TNA. And Jeff kind of has to like reassure the troops that, hey, this was like, they're wondering, is Jeff in on this? Is Jeff trying to get back into WWE? Like, you just have to answer all these questions. And from all accounts, it's like Jeff had no heads up beyond this showing up on the website. So it was egg on the face of Jeff outside of any of his doing. And it was Jerry that really created a lot of problems for Jeff by participating in this.
And the company by extension. You know, I feel bad for the roster, you know, like,
remember this is when they have no TV, by the way. And I think it's it's either right around when they announced the Spike deal or before the Spike deal. So already, like, your TNA talent have to be on eggshells. Like, we don't have TV. We don't know how this is going to end. And now this guy's showing up on WWE. Like, what does this mean?
At its core, I feel like probably even to this day, throughout its entire existence, you have some, I would say, really, really hungry professional wrestlers that simply want to try to make their mark in the industry as part of, at this point, a number two promotion. They're just trying to do their job to the best of their ability for the most part. And all of this sort of like weird corporate politicking on this top end is trying to really, distract from all of that. And that's somewhat unfortunate.
So I thought we were going to do this whole double shot in an hour. That's the end of episode.
We should talk about like the actual close with like him like getting into the death of his wife. That was really a major part of it all. Like, again, this is a story about TNA, but it's also completely tied into really the story of Jeff Jarrett as well. So, yeah,
well, this is another bout with breast cancer for Jill, and yeah, they do spend quite a bit of time on this at the end, and how Jeff is balancing this. They've got 3 young children. It is, he in one ways is a caregiver, but on the other, he's still running this company, and he's trying to balance both. They would get the creative meetings relocated to his home to alleviate some of this. If you remember, Jeff was pretty much off TV at this point after the prior year's Bound for Glory, and is, I'm sure going through just unbelievable struggles personally and professionally. It's not like TNA is just this turnkey operation that's running seamlessly. Like, it's still like this work in progress in early 2007.
He's estranged from his mom. He's estranged from his dad. His business is, I would say, like maybe fragile, like at best. His wife gets cancer again, and he has 3 children. Just any one of those things, I think, would be enough to possibly break somebody. To have to deal with all of that at the same time, I mean, it really maybe gives you the type of context that may have been missing, like in real time, to know what this person might have been going through. And certainly through this episode puts Jeff in the greatest sympathetic light, having to go through something like this. Also, seeing the roster talk about Jill maybe gives you some insight.
Was this like the most human we've heard Scott Steiner in
absolutely
a setting like this?
Steiner starts talking, and it's I like, you wouldn't have predicted that they would have had any sort of like significant relationship, but like Scott starts talking about Jill, saying like, hey, she was a beautiful woman, and like she was a great person, and then he just gets up and leaves because he can't continue because he's too emotional. David Sahadi, who was also like a really welcome part of this entire production, he spoke a whole lot, especially from the production side of like the making of TNA, especially in its earlier years. He got very emotional talking about Jill.
Vince Russo too.
Vince Russo as well. Yeah. I mean, so all of this, again, paints a bit more of a fuller picture of like what a Jeff Jarrett had gone through up until this point while creating this company.
Yeah. Again, it's, and
talks about how like the night that she died, he then realized, looking at his watch, that it was May 23rd. And somehow he, I guess, kind of took this to mean that she was going to be okay, because what I imagine, like, to him it was like Owen, like watching over her or something. I don't know, but that's really quite the coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bizarre coincidence in all of this. And again, it's like the story of his parents not going to the funeral. I mean, that one, like that, it was just heartbreaking to hear that. And Jeff spoke about this on the Helwani interview, that like his mother was contacted and was like, I'm on vacation, I can't come to the funeral. And Jerry and one of Jeff's brothers, they were at some local like fast food place having lunch instead of going to the funeral. You can't make any sense of like that. I don't care where your relationship is. I thought that was like a heartbreaking story to hear about. And Jeff ends it by saying, to his detriment, he did very little grieving and went right back to work. Which listen, you can look in hindsight and say that, this was someone that probably needed a whole lot of, counseling of what he has just endured, what he has already repressed probably from Owen and his lack of relationships with his parents. But I don't know, like if you were going through a tragedy like this and you had an outlet like work to distract yourself, like I don't know how many people would have done differently here. Like you just don't know how you're going to handle something like this. And when you compound all the things that this guy is dealing with, that sometimes is the answer. Like, you're not ready to attack these things. It's just,
and when you have the responsibility of holding a company up, like you're responsible for the health of the company, and also
this guy couldn't take 6 months off. Like
also,
that.
3 children at home that you have to do everything for.
Yeah.
There's no taking your foot off the gas pedal. You have to go even harder now.
Yeah, I didn't look at this as like this, I understood this mindset a lot, even if you can know that like it's going to rear its ugly head in a terrible way in the years to come. But like this guy was not in a position to be able to just take 6 months off and grieve. It was like, this company goes out, there's a lot of families that are depending on you. Like it's a very pressure packed role that he is in.
It all seems to like, so they don't state that he was drinking, or like they at least like, was there mention of like, like substance abuse issues at all?
Not at this period. It really is not
sort of
until
building up.
Yeah. Like at this point, like it always sounded like Jeff was, I'm sure he did some drinking, but it like you never heard of like problems he was going through at this point on that level. It's not that's why when all the stuff occurs in like 2017, like it was so out of character for Jeff, who was never associated with that. You didn't hear drug stories or drunk stories of Jeff Jarrett. It's why like this guy, he presented like a pretty united front publicly for many people, but
as he said, he was really good at holding it together for the public.
So obviously Jeff, I think is certainly like the big, he's very open in this first episode, and this is coming from Jeff's perspective, and I think like there is fair criticism to also be levied at Jeff towards like the business side of TNA and the handling early on of creative with his father, with Russo, and trying to balance that together. And that was just not going to be a tenable situation beyond that. But by this point, at the end of episode 1, they're firmly into the Spike TV era. They are going into what's probably like, per Jeff, like the most profitable and only profitable period of the company during those couple of years. And yeah, part 2 will further go into a lot of the dynamics between him and Dixie Carter, where Dixie becomes much more focused upon in this series.
Yeah. In looking at like the sort of Jeff Jarrett story this way, I think like you come out of it, number one, having tremendous sympathy for him for going through what he did with Owen and then his wife, which was some of the most raw that I've certainly ever seen Jarrett and several others actually talking about that Jill's passing. I think you look at it as like you look at him with the sign of respect for being able to say, I can't get a job here, so I'm going to make my own job. And I'm not just going to make my own job. I'm going to make a job for a lot of other people, and he has through the creation of TNA. So you look at him with tremendous respect for that. I think you question his ability to, create when just the simple reliance on Vince Russo through like some awful ideas, I think is enough to maybe like question whether or not he had the best taste in choosing maybe what the audience wanted at the time. But overall, he comes across as a very likable person, through this episode. And I do wonder if this was strictly, a 6 sides of TNA series if we would have had this much of a look at Jeff Jarrett the person. And in a way, I'm kind of grateful that we do, because I actually find this a lot more interesting and humanizing than just maybe a focus on a company itself.
Part 2 will continue for Post Wrestling Cafe members. So we have put out this as our inaugural edition for our Dark Side reviews. If you want to continue on throughout the season of Dark Side, we encourage you to join postwrestlingcafe.com. $8. You can sign up any point in the month and you're going to get the full month. So you don't have to worry about signing up the first of the month. Any date you sign up, you get your 30 days, and that will include all of our double shots covering Dark Side and WWE Unreal, which will be starting at late in July. On top of that, your cafe membership includes all of our G1 Climax podcasts that will run through August 16th. So that is ongoing, with our first G1 show coming up this Sunday with Karen Peterson and Bruce Lord, and you can see on the graphic there all the other bonuses you get on the cafe, from MCU Later, which is going through X-Men 97 Season 2, weekly editions of Collision Course hosted by Kate from Montreal, UFC 329 will be covered on Sunday, and of course, multiple rewind-aways. Last week, we looked at 2 episodes of the series Heels featuring Ricky Rabies, and next week, we go to 2005 for a review of WrestleMania 21 featuring Batista and John Cena being anointed as the next ones.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, traveling back to maybe a period where TNA was just in its infancy. So looking forward to talking about all of that. If you're strictly on maybe a Dark Side of the Ring kick, we have pretty much reviewed every single episode of the series. So you can go back into our double shot archive and listen to all of those if you so choose, and including Who Killed WCW, reviewed all of those episodes as well. So you could probably spend a whole year listening to our archives alone, and we're giving you access to it all for only $8. So if you're listening to the first half of this and you enjoy it, consider signing up at postwrestlingcafe.com.
It's a great usage of a year. You get to live for many of them. Why not spend one where people say, what did you do in 2026? That was my John and Wai year. I listened to all their reviews that year. Didn't leave the house.
You could do worse.
It's a great idea. All right, everybody. The reviews continue. Postwrestlingcafe.com. And that concludes our episode 1 review of Jeff Jarrett and the battle for tits and ass.